A baby deer lay trembling in the tall grass, its spotted coat barely visible among the shadows of the savanna. The fawn's breathing was shallow, its small chest heaving with each tiny, pained gasp. Its mother had been taken only hours earlier, a cruel act by poachers that left the plains quieter, rawer, and suddenly full of danger. The sun was sliding low, pouring honeyed light across the grasslands, and every long blade seemed to whisper the same terrible truth. Night was coming, and with night came predators. Death felt inevitable, but what followed that evening did not belong to any rulebook on animal behavior. What unfolded would puzzle the rangers who first spotted it, unsettle scientists who later argued over interpretation, and astonish every passerby who happened to stand in the right place at the right time. It would also remind anyone who watched closely that the wild keeps secrets, strange, tender ones, and sometimes, just sometimes, those secrets become lessons none of us expected to learn. A female leopard emerged from the acacia shade, sleek and purposeful, her muscles folding and unfolding beneath her dappled fur like living silk. Two mischief-making cubs tumbled at her heels, their bodies a chaotic mass of spots and curiosity. The fawn, hearing the crackle of movement, froze. Its eyes, still clouded with fear, widened. The world narrowed to the single silhouette coming closer. Predator, teacher, killer. The cubs pricked their ears, waiting. They were the kind of pupils that learned fast, eyes bright for technique, for the moment when a mother made the kill and taught the exquisite, efficient act of taking life. The leopard circled. Her name, given by the rangers months later when they started to piece the story together from countless camera frames, would be Kasai. She moved with the old, patient cruelty of a top predator, silent, precise, utterly confident. Kasai's golden irises fixed on the fawn like a judge weighing a sentence. The cubs watched, their ribs caught on the wind as they crouched, the muscle memory of their kind humming beneath their fur. And then something happened that no one expected. Instead of the abrupt lunge that might have ended the fawn's life in a heartbeat, Kasai paused. She lowered her head, not to bite or to deliver a death blow, but to touch. Her nose brushed the fawn's flank in a fluttering, almost nervous gesture. The fawn trembled and did not bolt. It did not flee because there was no human scent overpowering the air, no screaming or panicked scramble. Only the soft press of a predator's breath. Kasai started to groom. She licked the fawn's fur the way she licked her cubs, the movements oddly maternal. Careful, methodical, calming. The cubs blinked. They shifted their positions and watched. The savanna, which had expected one kind of story, felt like it was holding its breath for another. The rangers who later discovered them during a slow, methodical patrol almost did not believe their eyes. From the distance of the vehicle, they watched Kasai nuzzle, clean, and fold that entire small, shaking body into the sheltered curve of her flank. The cubs cuddled in, too, warm bodies forming a living blanket. Night crept across the land, and Kasai curled her massive, warm shape around the three youngsters as if she had chosen them before she understood why. In the murky heat of dusk, beneath an acacia's skeletal branches, a predator had become a guardian. That first night was not a peaceful fairy tale. It was a living negotiation between instincts. Kasai remained watchful. Her body was a taut coil of power even as she performed small, intimate acts of care, licking a tear away, nudging a quivering leg into a safer position, shifting so that the fawn's head could rest on her haunch. The cubs, confused but curious, mimicked her grooming with clumsy, loving jawwork. The fawn, bewildered into a kind of stunned trust, drifted into fragmented sleep. In the wild, trust is rare, and where it emerges it must pay for itself with survival. The rangers, watching from afar with night vision optics, felt that rare electricity, the sense of witnessing something that bent the expected arc of nature. Over the next days, the scene repeated itself, each time layering a thicker patina of awe on the ranger's initial shock. Kasai provided. She hunted for meat and brought back small kills. Diker, scrub hare, a plump rodent whose meat she shared in balance with the needs of her cubs. The fawn never fully ate the raw meat as the leopards did. Instead, it learned to nibble at tender shoots near the bones strewn after a meal. Kasai allowed it near her kills, licking the blood and dirt off its muzzle with the same patient gentleness she offered her natal young. The cubs accepted the fawn as if they had been told, in a language their species barely spoke, that kin can be chosen. News of such a thing spread slowly at first, carried in whispers between rangers and conservationists who had seen leaps of unexpected mercy before, but never of this kind. Cameras were set up at a respectful distance. Researchers argued about the motives and about the ethics of observation. Some wanted to intervene if danger arrived. Others insisted on leaving the tableau undisturbed so nature could reveal its truths. The rangers chose watchfulness and non-interference, a hard, human discipline that meant more restraint than they were used to. In a world of boxes and checklists, they kept their hands in their laps and their eyes wide. What makes such scenes possible is both simple and complicated. Kasai was a mother without an overabundance of food, but with a clear stake in her cubs' survival. The more she taught them to recognize patterns, the more prepared they would be. Perhaps the fawn's smallness and mournful helplessness triggered something raw inside of her. Predators are not monsters. They are creatures whose survival strategies include care for their young, teaching, and memory. Kasai's grooming behavior was not alien. It was an extension of the same mechanisms that compel her to keep her bloodline alive. What made it strange to human eyes was the crossing of prey into guardian space. A crossing both perilous and, for reasons we cannot fully calculate, true. As weeks passed, the fawn grew. Its legs lengthened, its spotted coat thickened into adult gleam, and its cautious steps became more confident. Kasai's cubs learned faster than many youngsters. They tumbled and stalked and practiced the tiny betrayals of predator life under their mother's watchful eye. The fawn learned to stay close when danger roared nearby, and to keep a wary distance when Kasai was at work stalking the wind. It learned to lift its head at the alarm signals the cats used, to crouch low and press its belly to the ground when a hunting bird flashed above. The dynamics of their relationship created an education neither species would have chosen alone. The fawn absorbed awareness, the slanted light that meant a predator may be near, the scent of hippo dung that signaled humans were on the river path, the small, almost invisible tremor of a ground beetle that meant a snake might be sunning. The cubs learned tenderness, the odd, unquantifiable lesson of presence, that sometimes protection is worth more than any immediate meal. For the rangers, it was a mammal-sized experiment in empathy. Yet nature, always patient and relentless, keeps time differently from our human calendars. Instinct is an accumulation of millions of years and does not dissolve simply because one mother chooses differently over a span of weeks. Predators sharpen. Prey remember older rules. The rangers asked, aloud in their camp discussions and late-night fireside debates, the questions everyone eventually asks of such an arrangement. How long could this possibly last? Would the cubs' increasing hunger and their growing competence at killing eventually outweigh the memory of the compassion Kasai showed them? Would the fawn's sense of safety, learned and fragile, be enough to survive adolescence? Would Kasai's tenderness be an enduring behavior or a fleeting anomaly born of circumstance? Then, one morning when the sky was thin and the air tasted of fresh dust, the rangers arrived at the site of their vigil and found Kasai alone on the ridge with her cubs at a close, restful distance. The fawn was not at her side. Panic was immediate and loud in the chest of every observer. Had predator logic finally reasserted itself? Had hunger or instinct done what the heart cannot stop? The rangers spread out, tracking hoofprints and paw marks, breath fogging in the cooling air. They found nothing alarming at first, only the faint imprint of small hooves heading in a gentle arc toward the river corridor that a few miles away, where the land rolled into a shallow valley dotted with thorn trees. The rangers spotted the fawn standing on a low rise. It was no longer the same fragile bundle from those early days. It was taller, its coat richer, its head held in a posture familiar to its kind. And yet it was not completely alone. It was surrounded by a small herd of its own species. They grazed in measured rhythm while the young buck or doe, the rangers could not be certain, though the gender would reveal itself later in a flash of adolescent movement, glanced up, ears alert, and then resumed. The fawn had found its herd. In the binoculars, the rangers held their breath, waiting to see whether Kasai or her cubs would follow, pounce, or make anything of this new scene. Kasai, they noted with something that felt like both relief and a quiet dissonance. remained on the ridge. She watched. Her eyes tracked the fawn with an intensity that was not hunger but a fierce, cool observation. On some mornings, she would position herself on the outcrop and bring the cubs with her. From there, they would watch the herd like sentinels at the gate, the feline shapes like punctuation marks on the rising grass. She did not approach. She did not pounce. She was in a role human language struggles to name. Protector from a distance, a guardian who understood boundaries. For the rangers, this was an extraordinary compromise. The fawn belonged with its kind by logic and by safety. To thrive, it needed to learn the migrations, the social cues, the mate selection, the very habits that made a herd a refuge. To remain close to Kasai would have been a slow death sentence as the cubs matured. Yet to leave entirely was also dangerous in its own way. The middle path these animals found, separation with supervision, integration with memory, seemed to work. Kasai's visits diminished over months. She came less often as her cubs grew bigger, their hunting instincts sharper. But she returned frequently enough to check that the deer had adapted, to ensure it had not strayed into a risky patch of land where hyenas prowled at night, to stand between the herd and a sky-darkening eagle when necessary. Those flinty acts of periodic protection were not a promise to raise someone else's child to adulthood. They were a kind of covenant, an acknowledgement that some bonds, once formed, shape behavior even when they cannot rewrite ancient needs. Scientists, when they finally had a chance to gather the footage and examine the timestamps, offered theories. Some suggested that this was an extreme example of maternal overflow. Kasai had lost a previous litter or had relatively small cubs, and, in a surplus of care, could not resist extending that tenderness beyond blood. Others argued for a more pragmatic reading. Kasai may have calculated that tolerating the fawn would be net beneficial because, in close quarters, the fawn's presence might draw other predators or scavengers that would provide opportunities for her cubs to learn without their mother having to do the entire teaching load. A few voices, the skeptics, said the story had been anthropomorphized, that cameras and human attention made the animals act in ways they would not normally, that feeding stations and proximity to human settlements distorted behavior, and yet the most straightforward explanation, the one that sat in the animals' bodies, regardless of human claims, was that life is messy and adaptive. Wild creatures are not bound by moral codes. They are bound by survival and sometimes by capacities to feel that resemble what humans call tenderness. Kasai's actions were not sentimental in the human sense. They were rooted in neural circuits that link care to the preservation of offspring. For reasons that may never be fully parsed, care overflowed. As months passed, the interface between the deer herd and Kasai's territory settled into an uneasy harmony. The fawn, now a young adult, integrated into the herd's migrations. The herd accepted it. It had the right calls, the right gait, the right awareness of the land. Yet on the outskirts, it was often the first to stand sentinel, ears twitching, signaling danger. When the wind carried the scent of far-off thunder or the metallic smell of a human iron gate, the young deer would lift its head and turn toward the ridge where Kasai watched. The cat would sit like a dark throne, and the two species, in their mutual recognition, would share a momentary, wordless conversation. For the rangers and the conservationists who observed and recorded and debated, the spectacle raised deeper questions. How much of animal behavior is fixed, and how much is improvisation? How often does mercy, understood not as human virtue, but as biological flexibility, appear in the long run of life? And what, if anything, should humans do when they encounter these cross-species bonds? Intervene? Celebrate? Study quietly? The answers were messy and uncomfortable. Some activists wanted to place trackers on Kasai to ensure she did not become a poaching target because of her celebrity. Conservationists worried that human hype would draw cameras and tourists, which would alter her behavior and endanger the very animals they wanted to protect. The story traveled beyond the savannah. Footage made its way to documentaries and scientific journals, to late-night segments and children's programs. People who'd never thought about leopards or deer suddenly had a story to carry. A predator chose to mother its prey once, and something in the world shifted because of it. Parents read the tale to children. Philosophers used it as a parable. Poets found new metaphors. The animal world, which most of us assume is ruled by brutal arithmetic, revealed an odd, fragile arithmetic of its own, one where timing, circumstance, and perhaps personality all colluded to produce a brief exception. But exceptions are seldom permanent. Keisai's cubs grew into adolescence with the clumsy arrogance of youth. They began to refine their killing technique, bringing down small antelope with the kind of textbook elegance that would one day feed cubs of their own. Keisai, ancient and wise in the way wild mothers are, continued to visit the ridge less and less. She had done what a mother does. She taught, she protected, she nudged her children toward independence. The fawn, now a deer with a history, had learned enough to survive in open grass and to rely on its herd. Sometimes the two lineages, feline and bovine, intersected at the waterhole, and it was always with the same careful distance. There was never a hunt from Keisai on that particular herd once she had accepted the presence of the deer she had once held. Whether that was a deliberate ethical choice or a pattern opened by the peculiar geometry of their shared landscape was a question that would trouble scientists and thrill romantics long after the last camera battery failed. The memory of that strange season lingered in the minds of those who'd seen it. The rangers wrote notes and logbooks, small sketches, observations about who fed when and how the cubs imitated licking. Younger conservationists used the footage in lectures about behavioral plasticity. A few researchers published a paper proposing that compassion, loosely defined as a behavioral extension of parental care, could occur in non-related species under certain conditions. The paper was careful, academic, full of hedging language, but it landed in popular consciousness as something more direct, proof, perhaps, that the wild has room for mystery and mercy. What, in the end, did Keisai give the fawn? She gave time. She gave shelter when the world had turned hostile. She gave the fawn an education in vigilance it would not have learned curled only among ungulates. She gave the cubs a strange lesson in restraint. And she gave everyone who watched the chance to rethink the blunt categories that so easily divide predator from prey, kindness from instinct. The world of survival is crude and beautiful. In a narrow window of grass and sky, a mother leopard chose a pattern that did not fit the ledger, and because of that choice, a small deer grew into its strength with a borrowed history of protection. If the story teaches anything, it is that nature is never a neat textbook. It is a thrum of possibilities, of exceptions, of risk-taking that is not only for humans. Once, under acacia shade, the rules shifted just enough for one precarious life to be held by a creature built to take it. The fawn lived, learned, and left the fold with knowledge no other of its kind carried. The memory of a cat's breath on its neck and the quiet assurance that tenderness, even when unlikely, can be a force of survival.